From Deputy Jennifer Carroll McNeill wishes to discuss the third National Strategy on Domestic, Sexual and Gender-Based Violence following the opening of public consultation recently. Minister is dealing with this, are you? Good, good. Thank you very much. The floor is yours, Deputy Jennifer Carroll McNeill.
Thank you, Ken Corla, and thank you for the opportunity to come back to this important subject as the third strategy is prepared and published. And I want to use this opportunity to recognise and keep the awareness, recognise why we're doing this and keep awareness of why we're doing this at the forefront of our mind. And I want to acknowledge the presence with me of both Deputy David Stanton, who worked in the Department of Justice and brought through the groundbreaking legislation in relation to coercive control and chaired the interdepartmental group on gender violence for some time, and also Deputy Alan Farrell, who has done huge advocacy to raise awareness around how women feel at risk in various different situations on public transport and out and about, and has been a huge advocate and champion for trying to advance the cause against gender and sexual violence. And I think it's important to acknowledge and remember again, although we had the very serious outpouring of care and response after the death of Aisling Murphy, it's important that we remember all of the women who died as a consequence of femicide. And Ken Corley, you'll be aware I've been trying to do this throughout the year to remember the different women at different stages. And if you don't mind my taking the opportunity to read into the record of the House the names of the women who died since 1996 in the months of May and June, according to Women's Aid. And there were 21 in May, and they are Angela Collins, Kitty Gubbins, Georgina O'Donnell, Helen Donegan, Martina Halligan, Donna Cleary, Patty Bainbridge, Mairead Moran, Niamh Murphy, Mary Hennessy, Breda Cummins, Rita Apine, Anastasia Kriegel, Mary Ryan, Lorraine Crowley, Georgina Eager, Siobhan Stapleton, Benta Carroll, Patricia Murphy, Patricia O'Connor and Gija Ruksakse. And in June, those names, there's 12, and those names are Mandy Wong, Sinead Kelly, Gertrude Dolan, Veronica Guerin, Karen Guiney, Sarah Nalligan, Tracy O'Brien, Yolanta Lubienne, Lynn Cassidy, Antra Ozolina, Sejitret Valgiman and Valerie French Gilroy. And that's from the Women's Aid Femicide Watch, published in March 2022 of this year. 249 women have died violently between 1996 and 2022. 18 children have died alongside their mothers. 158 of the women died in their own homes. 196 cases have been resolved. 87% of those that were resolved were killed by a man known to them. 13% of women were killed by a stranger. 1 out of 2 victims were killed by a current or former male intimate partner. That's 55% of the resolved cases. It can, of course, be a woman of any age, but women under 35 make up 50% of the cases in Ireland. In almost all murder-suicide cases, 22 out of the 23, the killer was the woman's partner. The reading in of the names, Cian Corla, is actually more important than I had realised. I was contacted by a woman last week who reminded me about one of the women I'd read in previously who had died in 2004, and she'd known her, and she rang me to tell me her story. She rang me to tell me how she pleaded with the woman not to go back to that house, and how she felt it was only going to end one way, and how it matters to people. It matters to people, to the friends of victims, to the families, to the nieces and nephews, the children, the brothers and sisters of victims, and it is important that we remember these women and that we remember why we're doing the work in relation to the third strategy, and that we remember it. They were voiceless in death, and unless we take the time, the few minutes, and I'm glad of it and thank you, the few minutes to acknowledge them here, they will remain voiceless and their experience will remain voiceless. And thank you for the opportunity to do it this evening.
Thank you, Deputy, for raising this matter, because I think you do us all a service by naming the women involved and by raising this particular matter. Minister Noonan, thank you very much for being here to deal with this.
Cian Corla leis an teachtam an ceist seo. And again, like the Cian Corla, I want to thank you for reading those names into the record of the House. I think it's important. Remember, these are people, women, families and lives that were cut short tragically and violently. And I think it's very important that we acknowledge and remember them. And I thank you for doing that. And again, to acknowledge the work of David Staunton and Alan Farrell, your colleagues as well, in the work that they have done in relation to coercive control. and tackling gender-based violence. I think it's really important collectively that we work collaboratively across the House to tackle this issue. Tackling domestic and sexual gender-based violence in all its forms is a key part of Minister McEntee's commitment to ensuring that everybody feels safe and is safe in our communities. This commitment has the full support of Government, and we have been working on a number of fronts to both combat domestic, sexual and gender-based violence and to ensure comprehensive supports for victims. As the Deputy is aware, Minister McEntee, along with Minister O'Gorman, commissioned an independent audit of how responsibility for domestic, sexual and gender-based violence is segmented across Government. Separately, TUSLA conducted a review of accommodation services for victims of domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. Both of these audits were carried out with a view to determining what efficiencies and improvements need to be introduced to how we manage DSGBV responses and services. On foot of these audits and following extensive consultation with Minister for Children, the Department of Justice will now have responsibility for funding of local refuges, rape crisis centres and associated helplines for victims of domestic, sexual and gender-based violence, while continuing to lead on policy in this area. As part of this, the establishment of a new statutory agency to address domestic, sexual and gender-based violence is under consideration. In tandem, Minister McEntee has been working on a whole-of-government strategy on domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. This strategy will be the most ambitious to date and will be structured around the 4 pillars or goals of the Istanbul Convention: prevention, protection, prosecution and coordinated policies. It will set an overall goal of zero tolerance in our society for domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. The strategy has been developed in partnership with the sector to ensure it is targeted, comprehensive and effective in achieving all of the goals set out. Earlier this year, Minister McEntee briefed those working in the sector on progress of the strategy, and as part of that ongoing consultation, a wider public consultation run by the Department of Justice concluded in March. Officials in that department are currently working to finalise the strategy for submission to Government in light of submissions received in this final consultative phase. To deliver on the high ambition of the strategy, it will be accompanied by a detailed action plan for the rest of this year and next. This action plan will ensure our work is targeted, precise and deliverable. It will set out how each of the aims will be achieved, which departments and agencies are responsible for them, and the time frame for their delivery. Minister McEntee intends to bring both the finalised strategy and the action plan to Government in the coming weeks, well before the summer recess, and thereafter they will be published as soon as possible. And again, to commend my colleague Minister McEntee for her work. I think she's certainly taken this issue really, really seriously to the point of acting with determination and with a sense of urgency, which we all absolutely want over the next number of years and beyond.
And of course, what I'm speaking about here, femicide, is very much the most extreme end of what we speak about in relation to gender and sexual violence. But as big a problem, and what leads towards that, is a cultural or any form of acceptance of that entry-level harassment, of that entry-level misogyny, as Deputy Farrell called out in a very public way from his experience on public transport. It's the controlling behaviours that have been exhibited that Deputy Stanton tried to address through his legislation on coercive control. And people said there was no point, that you couldn't prosecute a pattern, that you couldn't prosecute an idea or a set of behaviours. But that was shown to be wrong. And in fact, I want to commend the Gardaí for following up and prosecuting what people said couldn't be done, that controlling, manipulative set of behaviours. But if I could suggest, Minister, so much of this is rooted in education. We have the Gender Equality Committee working away every Thursday morning down in the committee rooms, and we're hearing from the secondary school students' unions, we're hearing from Safe Ireland, we're hearing from academics. It doesn't matter who we speak to. It all comes back to education and to having a fact-based, consent-based education that respects personhood from the earliest age, that's open and transparent about sexuality, that's open and transparent about facts, that's open and transparent about equality. Unless we have every child in Ireland receiving this appropriate education, we really just don't have a chance. When the deputies in this House drop their kids, if they're of that age, to school and look around the playground and wonder in 20, 25 and 30 years, which of these children will suffer this fate or any other form of misogyny or harassment, and which of them will be the perpetrators? And what are we doing today, and what are we going to do over the next 5 and 10 years that's going to be different from the education that I got or the education that other deputies got 20 and 30 and 40 years ago? What are we doing that's radically different, that gives us some chance of delivering a better outcome for those children 20 years from now, 25 years from now? And it is, in my view, objective education for all children is the only solution to this, or the only hope of a solution.
Minister.
Again, thank you, Deputy Carol McNeill, for this raising this. And again, I'll just address the education issue. I think you're absolutely right. Fear of harassment and violence should never be normalised, be it someone in the home or as they go about their daily life. And the prioritisation of this hugely important work is evident in the policy and legislative developments implemented by this government and those currently being progressed. It is also evidenced by the increased budget allocations that have been secured this year in order to address such heinous and unacceptable behaviour. That said, we know that we need to achieve a lot more. We will need to increase the provision of refuges and committed to ensuring that everyone who needs a refuge space will have access to one. And as part of this work to finalise the new strategy, the Department of Justice is examining how to advance the recommendations made in the Tussle Accommodation Review on both how to improve and how quickly we deliver these refuge spaces. But in the final seconds I've left, just again to address that point you made about education, I think you're correct. It's absolutely, it's a vital part of it. It needs to begin in our schools, in preschools, in primary schools, in secondary schools, right throughout our education curriculum, to ensure that girls and women feel safe in their communities. And I think that point is very important. And I do think that in the strategy that Minister McEntee is developing, it will take that whole of government approach, including education. I think it's vitally important that it does that. There's no doubt about it. We can break this cycle. Collectively, we can break it, and I think it's something that we're committed to doing. I do think that too that there's a huge responsibility on the education system to try and deliver that, and we do want to achieve that zero tolerance that Minister McEntee is speaking about. And again, I really commend you for raising this issue not just this evening in the Dáil, but also continuing to campaign and advocate for a change, a complete culture change in how women and girls are treated in our society.
Thank you, Deputy, and thank